Batman Begins, often forgotten in the shadow of The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, Begins feels like the odd one out when it comes to Christopher Nolan's Batman films. Personally, it's my favorite of the Dark Knight trilogy. It's the film that feels the most like the character I know. It feels the most Batman to me. From Scarecrow and his fear toxin to Batman fighting ninjas to save Gotham, there's a heightened charm that comes with this film that the sequels didn't quite nail for me. However, most of my experience with the film hasn't come from the history I have with the trilogy, rewatching these films over and over as a kid, but instead it's come from the forgotten tie-in video game connected to this film. Remember back in the day when almost every single film that was released ended up getting a movie tie-in game? We had games like Matrix: The Path of Neo, Peter Jackson's King Kong, Spider-Man 2, X-Men Origins Wolverine, Lord of the Rings, I'm talking Mean Girls on the Nintendo DS. Before we entered the era of Batman Arkham games, we had games like Batman Vengeance, The Rise of Sin Tzu, Dark Tomorrow, and Lego Batman. While some of these games were pretty good, others not so much. Batman Begins was the definitive Batman game for me. Movie tie-in games have had a reputation for being lazy, unpolished cash grabs, but even today, Batman Begins is clearly a game made by a dedicated team willing to bring the most fun Batman experience they could. Right in the beginning, Batman Begins quite literally drops you into the middle of the action. This little tutorial section showcases the combat, the controls, and offers a small taste of what is to come throughout the rest of the game. While Superman relies on his strength, Spider-Man on his spidey sense, Batman Begins takes a different approach with how it presents Batman's strengths. Being more than just a beat-em-up video game, EA decided to take pointers from Splinter Cell, a stealth action-adventure series developed by Ubisoft. Combining elements of that stealth and combat, Batman Begins goes back and forth between these two throughout the game. However, the stealth doesn't work like it does in the later Arkham games. So instead of taking out enemies one by one, Batman instead uses his logical thinking to scare the enemies, using gadgets, the environment, to make them drop their weapons or cower in fear before he takes them out. Having fear take the center stage here was really a smart move. Being the central theme of the film, it only makes sense for it to be a core gameplay element. Each and every single thing is about fear. Fear builds up your reputation, and the higher your reputation is, the easier it is to exact justice on Gotham's criminals and corrupt. Throughout the game, Batman even avoids certain confrontations altogether. Like the movies, Batman Begins opts to make Batman feel grounded, or at least as grounded as you can in a video game without getting rid of the fun. It is important to emphasize that the game is very fun. From scaring criminals to beating up ninjas and driving the goddamn tumbler, the game is simply fun. At the time, a huge part of what made Batman Begins feel like the definitive Batman game for me was the amount of gadgets you had at your disposal. You had batarangs, the grappling hook, smoke bombs, flash grenades, transponders, you could hack computers, pick locks, glide, and of course you had the absolute best gadget of all, the Batmobile. Given 2 dedicated levels, the Batmobile absolutely steals the show. Once you start driving it, you do not want to stop. Keep in mind this was 10 years before we'd get the Batmobile in Arkham Knight. The best level in the game is absolutely the recreation of the police chase from the film. It's so incredibly fun to play. The only thing that somewhat kills the fun is Rachel sitting in the passenger seat, repeating her dialogue over and over again. Although it is pretty cool that the actors from the film reprised their roles specifically for the video game, except for Jim Gordon, because I guess Gary Oldman was tired or something. I don't blame him. While movie tie-in games can have the actors feel like they're often phoning it in, Tobey Maguire, the cast of Batman Begins actually feels like they give a shit. I specifically remember Cillian Murphy being a standout among the actors in the game, but of course we spend most of our time with Christian Bale. While he sounded over the top in the sequels to the movie, Bale's voice in Batman Begins was always the best rendition of it. It's a bit softer and he adds a bit of a growl to it when he's trying to scare criminals. Seeing as how Batman does a lot of speaking in the game, it's nice to hear that Christian Bale didn't half-ass the role. If I had to say anything about the graphics, I guess they're alright. Especially for the time, these weren't necessarily mind-blowing. 2005 was filled with God of War, Resident Evil 4, Shadow of the Colossus, and so Batman Begins is a much smaller game. I find a lot of the details come from the environment and atmosphere. The character models are okay. I think Scarecrow, Batman, and Ra's all look pretty good, but Rachel and Alfred just look kind of weird to me. It's a nitpick. I'm not going to judge a game that released back in 2005 on its graphics, but I feel like this section was kind of worth mentioning. The best thing about the game visually is Batman's cape. It does glitch around sometimes, but the way it flows and moves is so satisfying. I love it. Now, the story for the game isn't really anything special, if I'm being honest. Because the story has to be so tied down to the film, the game mostly follows what feels like the second half of the movie. A large chunk of Batman Begins, and of course the emotional center of the movie, is Bruce Wayne's journey into becoming the symbol of justice that is Batman. But because we can't have too many video game levels walking around as Bruce Wayne, we're given quick recaps narrated by Christian Bale over movie footage, and I mean, it's alright. The story feels largely non-existent when playing through the game. Plot points and entire scenes are left out entirely. In the case of Jim Gordon and Rachel, they provide almost nothing to the game. The focus is very much on the mechanics and navigating these different levels, which serve as different parts of Gotham. The best levels are the Batmobile ones, like I mentioned earlier, but also I love the levels in Arkham Asylum. Hunting Scarecrow in the first part, running from the police in the second, and ultimately ending in that insane car chase, these levels are really where the game hits its stride. You get a better hang of the mechanics, the puzzles, and the atmosphere is just a really nice touch. As a Batman game, Batman Begins is pretty fun, if not still pretty dated. The game length is extremely short, but that doesn't stop it from feeling pretty repetitive in the last few levels. What really elevates this game is that it serves to be a quick, fun Batman adventure with blockbuster style action, some nice platforming here and there, and of course, scaring the crap out of bad guys. The amount of nostalgia that flows through my veins booting this game up all these years later is absolutely insane. Batman has always been my favorite fictional character, and revisiting the video game that I played over and over back in the day just really made me want to make a video on it. And when it comes to the era of movie tie-in games, it seems like a large part of the community wants to forget that side of gaming history, but for me, a lot of these video games were my childhood. I mean, yeah, alright, these games were mostly pretty bad or forgettable, but when you're a kid, you like everything. At least I did. And it was because of these games where I was able to be the characters that I saw on screen. It sounds dramatic, but it's a nice way of thinking about it. Batman Begins, the video game, is a game that I will always remember and cherish. Just like the film, at that point in my life, this was the definitive Batman experience.